The town left her in a burlap bag to die until a quiet cowboy chose mercy in the Wild West. 18000 USA Tale. The small town of Sundown Creek sat on the edge of the prairie, a place where the wind carried dust as easily as it carried gossip. There was the kind of town where every face was familiar. Every step on the wooden boardwalk echoed in the hearts of those who walked it, and every stranger's arrival was noticed. Life here was not easy. The sun beat down harshly during the day, turning the earth into a cracked, thirsty plain, and the nights were often chilly, with the quiet broken only by the occasional howl of a coyote or the distant creak of a windmill. The people of Sundown Creek were hardy, shaped by years of struggle and the knowledge that in the Wild West survival often depended on more than just courage. Into this rough, quiet town came Clara Hawthorne, a young woman with eyes that seemed too gentle for the world she had entered. She had traveled for weeks across open plains and dusty trails, leaving behind a home that had offered little more than danger and fear. Clara was not wealthy, nor did she possess any grand skills, but she carried with her a quiet strength and an understanding of the small kindnesses that could ease life in a harsh land. She knew how to help people with simple remedies, how to mend a torn dress or tend to a bruised child, and most of all, she had learned to watch and listen, to read the intentions of those around her before trusting anyone completely. The townspeople were wary of her from the moment she stepped into Sundown Creek. Outsiders were rarely welcomed warmly, and women traveling alone were viewed with suspicion. Some whispered that she had something to hide, others assumed that she might be trouble. The truth was far simpler. Clara wanted only a chance to live peacefully, to earn her keep honestly, and perhaps to find a place where she could finally feel safe. Yet in Sundown Creek, trust was not given lightly. The people were shaped by hardship, and their ideas of justice were strict, often harsh, and unforgiving. Clara found a small room above the bakery, rented from a kind woman named Mrs. Tully, who had herself come to Sundown Creek many years earlier. The room was small, but it had a window that looked out over the dusty main street, and from it Clara could see the life of the town unfold each morning. Children ran barefoot along the dirt paths, men returned from the fields with sunburned skin and aching backs, and women carried baskets of laundry or water, their faces lined from years of toil. Every day, Clara observed them all quietly, taking care not to draw attention. Despite her efforts to remain unnoticed, Clara began helping where she could. When Mrs. Tully fell ill with a fever, Clara brought her warm broth and herbs she had gathered from the nearby hills. She assisted the children with small scrapes and bruises, washing wounds and applying simple remedies. She offered advice to those who asked for it, always speaking gently and patiently. Slowly, some people began to take notice, though not all reactions were kind. Some whispered about her skill with herbs, wondering if she was a healer or something else, and in a town where superstition ran deep, rumors could spread faster than the wind across the prairie. Despite these early challenges, Clara kept to herself, content to work quietly and live simply. She walked the town's dirt roads each morning, greeting a few neighbors with a nod or a smile. She spent afternoons tending to her small herb garden behind the bakery, learning which plants thrived in the harsh soil and how to care for them. Evenings were her own, spent reading by candlelight or listening to the faint sound of wind through the wooden shutters. For a time it seemed she might finally have found a place where she could survive, even if she could not yet fully belong. However, Sundown Creek had a way of testing newcomers. One particular man, the owner of the local saloon, took an immediate dislike to Clara. He was a burly man with a loud voice and a quick temper, and he did not appreciate anyone who did not fit neatly into the rules of the town. Clara had simply declined to serve him one evening when he demanded her attention, and in his pride he began to spread stories that Clara was no ordinary woman, suggesting she had a past full of secrets and lies. Others, already wary of her presence, began to listen. The whispers started small, carried from one neighbor to another, but they grew louder each day. Clara felt the weight of these eyes and ears. She could sense the change in the town's atmosphere. The way neighbors avoided her glance, the way shopkeepers became less friendly. She tried to ignore it, focusing on her work and her small acts of kindness, but the tension was palpable. Sundown Creek was a place where rumors could turn into judgments, and judgments could turn into action. She had seen enough of the world to know that even a small misunderstanding in a town like this could grow into something dangerous. One evening, after a long day of errands and quiet chores, Clara returned to her room above the bakery. The sky was painted in shades of orange and purple as the sun dipped below the horizon. She paused by the window, looking out over the street. The town seemed peaceful, but she knew that appearances could be deceiving. The wind rustled the dry leaves in the gutters, and the shadows of the buildings stretched long across the dusty ground. Clara felt a flicker of unease, a sense that something in Sundown Creek was shifting. The days that followed brought small but unsettling signs. Items were misplaced in her room. Doors creaked when she was sure she had locked them, and she occasionally caught glimpses of people watching her from a distance. No one spoke directly to her about their suspicions, but she could feel the town's eyes on her, the weight of their judgment pressing down like the summer heat. Clara tried to remain calm, reminding herself that fear could be as dangerous as any enemy. She focused on her routine, tending to her garden, helping Mrs. Tully recover, and quietly observing the townsfolk as they went about their lives. Even in these tense days, Clara found moments of beauty and hope. She discovered a patch of wildflowers by the river, their colors vibrant against the dry earth. She met a traveling merchant who shared stories of distant towns, of mountains and rivers and forests she had never seen. These small encounters reminded her that the world was bigger than Sundown Creek, that life could still hold wonder even in the midst of suspicion and fear. Yet, the shadow over her remained, growing heavier with each passing day. It was during one of these quiet evenings that Clara first realized the depth of the town's suspicion. She had been walking home from the market, carrying a small basket of supplies, when a group of men paused their work in the street to watch her pass. Their eyes followed her closely, their expressions hard and unforgiving. She tried to appear calm, meeting no one's gaze, but the feeling of being judged, of being unwanted, was overwhelming. She quickened her steps, hoping to reach the safety of her room above the bakery before the tension escalated further. That night, Clara lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. The room was small and dark, lit only by the faint glow of the moon through the window. She thought of the life she had left behind, of the journey that had brought her here, and of the uncertain days ahead. Sundown Creek had not welcomed her, and the whispers that followed her had grown louder, more pointed. She knew that living here would require more than kindness and patience. It would require courage and a careful understanding of the people who surrounded her. Clara closed her eyes, taking a deep breath, steeling herself for the challenges that were sure to come. By the next morning, the town seemed no different on the surface. Children still ran along the dirt streets, the blacksmith's hammer still rang out across the square, and the sun rose over the prairie as it always had. Yet, for Clara, the world had changed. She had felt the first true weight of fear, the knowledge that a town could turn against someone with whispers and suspicion alone. She resolved to remain cautious, to observe carefully, and to continue helping where she could, but always with an awareness of the fragile line between safety and danger. And so, Clara Hawthorne began her life in Sundown Creek in earnest. She moved through the town with quiet determination, offering kindness, learning the rhythms of the place, and watching as the town watched her. She did not yet know how deep the suspicion would run, nor how far the town would go to enforce its own sense of justice. But she understood even now that in the Wild West, survival was never certain and mercy was as rare as water in the desert. Clara's days in Sundown Creek continued quietly at first, but the tension she had sensed in Part 1 began to grow stronger. The whispers about her didn't fade. Instead, they seemed to follow her wherever she went. People in the town watched her with cautious eyes, their suspicion thinly veiled behind polite nods or quick smiles. Clara noticed it in the way the shopkeepers hurried her through the counter, the way children glanced at her with curiosity that quickly turned to caution, and the way some adults crossed the street to avoid passing too close. It was as though the town itself had taken sides, and Clara was on the outside. She tried to focus on her work and the small tasks that had given her purpose. Mrs. Tully's health improved slowly, and Clara spent many afternoons preparing herbs and broths to help her recovery. She tended her tiny garden behind the bakery, coaxing green shoots from the dry soil, finding comfort in the simple acts of nurturing life. She visited neighbors quietly, offering help only when it was requested, and avoided confrontation at all costs. Yet no matter how careful she was, she could feel the growing storm of resentment from certain townsfolk. The man whose anger had first sparked the whispers was still watching her closely. The saloon owner, a large man named Jed Hawkins, had a reputation for being quick to anger and slower to forgive. He held grudges like treasures, and he did not appreciate Clara ignoring him. It had been a simple refusal to serve him on a busy evening, yet he had taken it personally. For weeks he spread stories that painted Clara as deceitful, dangerous, or untrustworthy. People who had barely noticed her now began to whisper along with him. The tension in the town thickened, though no one spoke openly to Clara. One afternoon, Clara noticed a group of men gathered near the general store. They were whispering, glancing around, and occasionally pointing in her direction. She felt her chest tighten as she realized their attention was focused on her. She tried to stay calm, slowing her steps as she passed them, pretending to be absorbed in her basket of supplies. Still, the feeling of being hunted settled over her like a heavy cloak. She had learned in her life that fear could sharpen awareness, but it also weighed heavily on the heart. Every glance, every murmur seemed to carry judgment, and Clara's sense of safety was slipping. The turning point came one evening after the sun had dipped behind the hills, casting long shadows across the town. Clara had been finishing her chores at the bakery, cleaning dishes and sweeping the small floor of her rented room. She thought she was alone, but she heard footsteps outside her door. She paused, her heart quickening, as voices whispered in the hall. One was Jed Hawkins' deep, gruff tone. The other, several softer voices of men she recognized from the town. Before she could react, the door swung open, and hands reached for her. She struggled, trying to break free, but they were too strong. They tied her hands tightly behind her back and wrapped her in a coarse burlap sack. The material was rough against her skin, and she gasped as the dust from the sack filled her nose and mouth. She tried to shout, but her voice was muffled, and the darkness pressed in. Panic gripped her, cold and raw, and for the first time she truly felt the danger of being alone in a town where she had no allies. The townsfolk carried her quietly to the outskirts of Sundown Creek, near the edge of the river that ran past the town. The sound of flowing water was a small comfort, though Clara was too afraid to notice it fully. She could feel the dirt beneath her, hear the muted voices of the men as they debated what to do next. Their anger and suspicion had reached a point where they were willing to take justice into their own hands, ignoring any sense of mercy or reason. Clara's thoughts raced. She remembered the long, lonely trails she had traveled to reach Sundown Creek, the moments when she had hoped for safety. And she realized that now, all of that hope had been stripped away in an instant. But just as despair began to settle over her, a quiet figure appeared on the horizon. A man on horseback was riding slowly along the trail, his wide-brimmed hat casting a shadow over his face. Clara strained to see him, her heart pounding in fear and hope at the same time. This was Elijah Granger, a cowboy who had passed through Sundown Creek several times before. He was a man of few words, known in nearby settlements for his quiet demeanor and sense of fairness. Unlike the townsfolk, he did not carry judgment in his eyes, only careful attention, as though he were weighing what he saw before taking action. Elijah slowed his horse when he reached the group of men. He observed silently as they debated, noting the burlap sack and Clara's muffled struggles. His presence alone caused the men to pause, their confidence faltering slightly in the face of someone who seemed both calm and unafraid. Elijah dismounted slowly, keeping his hands visible, showing no threat but also no weakness. His voice, when he finally spoke, was steady and low, demanding their attention. He asked what they were doing, and why they had treated the woman this way. The men muttered excuses, trying to justify their actions, but Elijah was not satisfied. He could see the fear in Clara's eyes, even through the coarse material of the sack. There was no malice in her struggle, only survival, and Elijah recognized the truth immediately. In that moment, he decided that he would not allow cruelty or blind suspicion to continue unchecked. He stepped forward, ignoring the men's angry protests, and cut the rope that held the sack closed. Clara emerged, coughing and gasping for air, blinking against the evening light. Her face was pale, her hair dusty, and her hands sore from the bindings, but she was alive. Elijah helped her to her feet, steadying her as best he could. The townsfolk hesitated, unsure of how to respond to a man willing to defy them openly. Some looked ashamed, others angry, but Elijah's calm and firm presence made it clear that he would not leave until Clara was safe. Once free, Clara stumbled a few steps before she could regain her balance. The relief she felt was overwhelming, mixing with a lingering fear of what might follow. She had been abandoned by the town, left for punishment without reason, yet now, unexpectedly, someone had shown mercy. Elijah stayed near her side, silent but watchful, as though he were protecting her without needing to announce it. It was a kindness so rare in this harsh land that Clara could hardly believe it was real. As night fell, Elijah made the decision that would change both their lives. He knew that staying in Sundown Creek would put Clara in danger again. The townsfolk's anger had only been delayed, and their fear of outsiders was too deep to allow her safety. He offered Clara the chance to leave with him, to escape the town quietly before dawn, and she agreed without hesitation. Together, they prepared to ride out, knowing that the path ahead would not be easy, but certain that survival and freedom were worth the risk. The journey away from Sundown Creek was quiet at first, filled with careful steps and cautious glances over the shoulder. Clara held on to the reins of the horse as Elijah led the way, her mind racing with thoughts of what had just happened. She thought of the town she had tried to befriend, the people who had judged her without knowing her, and the small acts of kindness that had been overshadowed by fear. In Elijah's calm presence, she began to feel a flicker of hope, realizing that perhaps not all people were blinded by suspicion or cruelty. As they traveled further from the town, the prairie stretched out before them, endless and open. The sky was filled with stars, the quiet punctuated only by the soft clatter of hooves on the dry earth. Clara's body ached from the struggle of the evening, but her heart felt lighter. She had survived what many would have considered certain doom, and she had found an unexpected ally in Elijah. The journey ahead would be difficult, but for the first time since arriving in Sundown Creek, Clara felt that she might truly be free. Through that night, Clara and Elijah rode in silence, each lost in thought. She thought of the future, wondering where this path would take her, and what other dangers might lie ahead. Elijah, though quiet, remained alert, watching the horizon, sensing the slightest movement in the darkness. In his steady presence, Clara found the courage to believe that perhaps, even in the harshest of lands, mercy and kindness could exist. And though the town of Sundown Creek had tried to break her spirit, she realized that her story was far from over. Clara and Elijah rode through the night, the soft rhythm of the horses' hooves blending with the quiet of the prairie. For a while neither spoke, both lost in thought. Clara's mind replayed the terrifying events of the previous evening. The hands that had bound her, the rough burlap sack, the cold fear that had gripped her when the townsfolk left her. Yet she also thought of Elijah, of the calmness in his voice, the strength in his presence, and the mercy he had shown when no one else would. It was a mix of fear and hope, confusion and relief, and Clara realized that this journey might be the start of something entirely new. As dawn broke, the sky shifted from deep indigo to pale gold, casting long shadows across the rolling plains. Elijah guided the horse along a narrow path between low hills, always alert, his eyes scanning the horizon for any signs of danger. Clara held the reins loosely, letting him lead, but her gaze wandered across the open land. The prairie was vast and wild, with tall grasses that swayed in the morning breeze and small flowers peeking through the earth. Birds began to sing, their songs a gentle reminder that life went on even in the face of hardship. The first few miles were quiet. Clara began to feel her body relax slightly, the tension of the previous night slowly easing. She appreciated Elijah's presence, not only for his protection but also for the quiet strength he carried. He did not speak much, but when he did, his words were measured, thoughtful, and calming. Clara found herself listening closely, learning from him, understanding how he navigated the world with care and observation. He was not boastful or loud, yet there was a quiet authority in the way he moved, a sense that he could handle challenges without unnecessary conflict. Despite the calm, Clara knew the danger had not passed. Sundown Creek was behind them, but the fear of being pursued lingered. The townsfolk had acted with harshness and suspicion, and she could not assume that all had been silenced by Elijah's intervention. Every rustle of grass, every distant sound made her pulse quicken. Yet she also knew that hiding in fear would only limit her freedom. She resolved to stay alert, to move carefully, and to trust only what she could see and hear for herself. As they rode, Elijah spoke for the first time since they had left the town. "We'll rest at the old creek ahead," he said, pointing toward a small ribbon of water that cut through the prairie. "It's not far from here, and the trees will give us some cover. We can eat, drink, and plan the next steps." His tone was calm, but there was no hesitation, no doubt. Clara nodded, grateful for the guidance. She had been alone for so long that having someone to rely on, even temporarily, was a comfort she hadn't realized she needed.
The creek appeared sooner than Clara expected.
Sunlight sparkled off the water, and a gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the small trees lining the banks. Elijah led the horse to a shallow area where it could drink, while Clara stepped carefully onto the soft ground. The air smelled fresh and cool, a stark contrast to the dust and tension of Sundown Creek. Clara knelt beside the water, cupping it in her hands to drink, feeling the cool liquid soothe her throat and clear her mind. It was a moment of peace, a brief pause in the whirlwind that had overtaken her life. After tending to the horse and allowing it a brief rest, Elijah and Clara settled under the shade of a tree. He produced a small bundle of bread and cheese from his saddlebag, offering it to Clara. She accepted it gratefully, eating slowly, savoring each bite. For the first time in days, she felt a sense of normalcy. The fear that had gripped her was still present, but it had softened, replaced by a cautious optimism. She looked at Elijah and wondered about the life he had led, the experiences that had shaped him into the quiet, steadfast man she now trusted. As they rested, Clara shared fragments of her story with him. She spoke of the dangers she had faced before arriving in Sundown Creek, the struggles of surviving alone and the small hopes she had clung to along the way. Elijah listened quietly, nodding occasionally, never interrupting, never judging. His calm attention made Clara feel seen in a way she had not experienced in months. She realized that sometimes survival was not just about avoiding danger, but also about finding someone who could understand and support you, even in silence. The afternoon passed slowly, filled with quiet conversation and careful observation of their surroundings. Elijah pointed out areas where the ground was soft or uneven, where animals might leave tracks and where travelers could easily hide. Clara paid attention, learning how to read the land, how to anticipate potential threats, and how to use her surroundings wisely. It was knowledge born of experience, and she felt grateful to receive it. Each lesson was another step toward independence, another tool to help her navigate the uncertain path ahead. By late afternoon, they prepared to move again. The sun was high, casting long shadows and highlighting the expanse of the prairie. Elijah led the horse along a narrow trail, moving cautiously but steadily. Clara followed, her confidence growing with each step. The bond between them deepened as they traveled, a quiet trust forming in the shared understanding of danger, survival, and compassion. It was not friendship in the conventional sense, nor was it dependence. It was a partnership formed out of necessity and respect, forged in the fires of adversity. As evening approached, they found a small hollow between two low hills, a natural shelter that would protect them from the wind and provide a vantage point for observing the surrounding area. Elijah set up a small camp, carefully arranging a fire pit and ensuring that their presence was not easily detected. Clara helped, her hands steady as she learned the practical skills that came with life on the prairie. They worked in silence for the most part, the occasional word exchanged, the unspoken understanding guiding their movements. That night, under a sky full of stars, Clara felt a mixture of exhaustion and relief. She had survived the town's cruelty, found refuge with Elijah, and taken her first steps toward freedom. Yet the challenges were far from over. She knew that traveling through the Wild West was never without risk, that each day could bring new obstacles, and that the past she had left behind might still catch up to her. But for the first time, she also felt hope. Not a naive hope, but a quiet, determined belief that she could endure, that she could find safety, and that mercy and kindness were not impossible to find. As they sat by the fire, Elijah spoke softly, almost to himself, about the lessons he had learned in his own travels. He told Clara that the world was full of people who acted out of fear or misunderstanding, and that often courage meant standing up for what was right, even when no one else would. Clara listened intently, feeling the weight of his words and the wisdom they carried. She understood that their journey was not just about physical survival, but also about navigating a world that could be harsh, unforgiving, and full of judgment. Through the night, the fire crackled and the stars shone brightly above them. Clara lay on a bed of soft grass, wrapped in a blanket Elijah had provided. Her thoughts wandered between fear and gratitude, between memories of Sundown Creek and the promise of the open prairie. She felt a sense of connection to Elijah, a bond formed not through words alone, but through shared experience, understanding, and the quiet courage to act when it mattered most. The next morning brought the promise of another day on the trail. Clara felt stronger, more aware, and more determined. She understood that the journey ahead would be difficult, but she also knew that she was no longer entirely alone. Elijah's presence gave her a sense of security, a reminder that mercy and kindness could exist even in the harshest of places. Together they would face the challenges of the Wild West, step by step, learning from each other and from the land they traveled. The experience of Sundown Creek remained fresh in Clara's mind, a warning of what suspicion and fear could create. Yet it also served as a lesson in resilience, in the importance of hope, and in the extraordinary impact that a single act of mercy could have. Elijah had saved her from immediate danger, but he had also shown her a path forward. A path where trust, care, and courage could coexist even in a world that often seemed cruel. As they rode on, Clara looked at the endless horizon, feeling a mixture of determination and curiosity. The prairie stretched before them, vast and full of possibilities. She realized that while the past could not be erased, the future was hers to shape. And though Sundown Creek had tried to define her through fear and judgment, she was determined to move forward with her own strength, guided by the quiet courage of the cowboy who had chosen mercy when it mattered most. The days following their escape from Sundown Creek were both freeing and exhausting. Clara and Elijah traveled slowly, taking care to avoid well-worn trails where other travelers or townsfolk might pass. The prairie stretched endlessly in every direction, a mix of golden grasses, rocky outcrops, and distant hills. At first, Clara had been filled with a cautious hope, but as the miles passed, the weight of uncertainty began to press on her. The world outside the town was vast and untamed, and with freedom came responsibility and danger she could not always predict. Elijah noticed her tension but did not comment. He knew that words sometimes made fear heavier, and silence could be more comforting. Instead, he guided her through narrow paths over small streams and along shaded ridges where the sun would not scorch them. He taught her to watch the wind, to notice the patterns of birds, and to sense when animals or people were near. Clara absorbed every lesson, grateful for his patience and skill. But even with these tools, a small part of her remained anxious. The past could follow, and she did not know how far Sundown Creek's anger might reach. One afternoon, as they rested near a rocky bluff, Clara began to notice that her own confidence wavered. She had thought the prairie would feel endless and open. Yet now it seemed isolating and empty. The loneliness of travel began to creep into her thoughts, mixing with the fear of being discovered. She realized she had left behind the small safety of the bakery, the quiet routines, and even Mrs. Tully's comforting presence. Each step away from Sundown Creek, though necessary, reminded her of how exposed she truly was. Elijah noticed her quiet worry and spoke gently. "It's normal to feel this way," he said. "The land is open, yes, but that's why we must rely on each other. Trust the skills you've learned. Trust yourself." His voice was calm, carrying no judgment, only understanding. Clara listened carefully, drawing strength from his words. She realized that while the world could be harsh, courage was not about never feeling fear. It was about moving forward despite it. That evening they camped near a small grove of trees at the edge of a creek. Clara set up their supplies with care while Elijah prepared a fire. The soft crackle of burning wood filled the air, and for a brief moment the world felt safe again. They ate in silence, sharing food without words, each lost in thought. But as the sun dipped behind the horizon, casting long shadows across the land, Clara's mind returned to the town she had left behind. She thought of the faces of those who had tried to harm her, the cold hands that had tied her, and the burlap sack that had suffocated her. The memory stirred fear, and that fear began to press heavily on her chest. As night fell, Clara felt the full weight of exhaustion and emotion. The adrenaline of her escape had faded, leaving her with the reality of uncertainty and isolation. She realized that being free was not the same as being safe, and the thought made her anxious. What if Sundown Creek's anger followed her? What if the harshness of the prairie itself became too much? She tried to push these thoughts aside, but they returned again and again, twisting in her mind like the wind through the grasses. Elijah noticed the tension in her posture and the way her hands trembled as she arranged their bedding. He moved closer, placing a steady hand on her shoulder. "You're stronger than you think," he said. "Fear is natural, but it doesn't have to control you. We face what comes step by step." Clara looked into his eyes, seeing sincerity and calm, and she felt a flicker of courage. She nodded slowly, taking a deep breath, reminding herself that she had survived the town's cruelty and that she had skills and knowledge to protect herself. The night was quiet except for the gentle sound of the creek and the occasional rustle of animals in the underbrush. But sleep did not come easily. Clara lay awake, thinking of the future and what it might hold. She wondered if she could ever feel truly safe again, if the shadows of the past would always follow her, and if the world beyond Sundown Creek could ever be as kind as Elijah had shown. She realized that freedom was not only about escaping danger, but also about facing the uncertainty of life with courage and resilience. Morning brought a new challenge. As they continued their journey, they encountered a sudden thunderstorm. Heavy clouds rolled across the sky, and rain began to fall in sheets, soaking the ground and making the narrow trail slippery. Clara struggled to maintain her balance on the horse, shivering from the cold and wet. Elijah guided her carefully, steadying the horse and offering quiet instructions. The storm was relentless, and they had to find shelter quickly. After a tense search, they discovered a small cave tucked into the side of a hill. It was not large, but it offered protection from the rain and wind. They led the horse inside and huddled together near the back of the cave, sharing warmth and trying to stay dry. Clara's hands shook from both cold and fear, and Elijah handed her a small bundle of dry cloth to wrap around herself. "We'll be okay," he said softly. "The storm will pass, and we'll move on after." Clara nodded, clinging to his words as though they were lifelines. As they waited for the storm to ease, Clara reflected on her journey. She had left Sundown Creek with hope and relief, but the prairie reminded her that freedom was not simple. Every challenge, the storm, the uncertain path, the fear of being pursued, tested her courage and determination. She realized that survival was not only about escaping danger, but also about facing each day with careful thought, resilience, and trust in those who truly cared for her well-being. The next few days were a mix of travel, rest, and small lessons. Elijah continued to teach her how to read the land, find safe paths, and anticipate possible dangers. Clara began to feel her confidence grow, though the memory of Sundown Creek and the fear it had instilled remained close. She understood now that her journey was about more than escaping the past. It was about learning to navigate the world with awareness, courage, and compassion. During one quiet afternoon, as they rested near a shaded stream, Clara allowed herself to speak more openly with Elijah. She told him about her fears, her memories of the town, and the lingering anxiety she felt even as the miles stretched behind them. Elijah listened carefully, offering encouragement without judgment. "It's okay to feel afraid," he said.
"It's normal. What matters is how we respond."
"Courage isn't the absence of fear, it's facing it." Clara felt a sense of relief. For the first time, she realized that fear could be acknowledged without letting it control her. Despite the calm moments, tension remained. Clara noticed every movement in the grass, every shadow on the trail. She was alert, aware that the prairie, while beautiful, could hide dangers of its own. Her mind worked constantly, balancing fear with observation, worry with hope. She understood that the journey ahead would continue to test her. But she also knew that each challenge was an opportunity to grow stronger and more resilient. One evening, as the sun set in a blaze of orange and red, they reached a ridge overlooking a wide valley. The view was breathtaking, the land stretching endlessly, dotted with trees, streams, and distant hills. Clara paused, taking it all in. For a moment, the fear that had weighed so heavily on her seemed to lift, replaced by a quiet awe at the vastness and beauty of the world. She realized that even in the harshest places there could be wonder, hope, and moments of peace. Yet she also knew that the path forward was uncertain. The town of Sundown Creek might fade from sight, but the lessons it had taught her would remain. She had learned the fragility of trust, the danger of fear and suspicion, and the importance of mercy and kindness. She had also discovered that courage could take many forms, from the quiet strength Elijah had shown to the resilience she found within herself. The breaking point had tested her limits, but it had also revealed her inner strength. That night, as they camped under a blanket of stars, Clara felt a sense of calm she had not known in weeks. The storm had passed, the prairie stretched endlessly before them, and Elijah remained a steady presence at her side. She understood that the journey was far from over. The challenges and uncertainties would continue to arise, but she also knew that she was no longer alone. The breaking point had arrived and passed, leaving her stronger, wiser, and more prepared for the days ahead. As they lay in silence, listening to the soft rustle of leaves and the distant call of night birds, Clara reflected on everything she had endured. Sundown Creek had tried to define her through fear and suspicion, but she had survived. Elijah had shown her that kindness and mercy could exist even in the harshest world, and she had discovered that true courage was not only about escaping danger, it was about facing each day with hope, resilience, and trust in herself and those who cared for her. The morning sun rose slowly over the prairie, casting a warm golden light across the land. Clara stretched her arms and took a deep breath, feeling the freshness of the new day. The journey had been long and difficult, and though she was tired, she also felt a sense of accomplishment. The challenges of the past weeks, the fear, the cold nights, the storms, and the shadows of Sundown Creek had tested her in ways she had never imagined. Yet here she was, alive and moving forward, with Elijah riding silently beside her, a steady presence in the vast openness of the land. They traveled through gentle hills and open meadows, finding small streams to drink from and shaded areas to rest. Clara had grown stronger with each mile, learning how to manage the horse, read the land, and anticipate potential hazards. She no longer felt the same fear she had in Sundown Creek, though caution remained. Her mind was sharper, her senses more alert, and her heart more resilient. Every day she discovered something new about herself, about courage, and about the importance of trust. Elijah remained quiet for much of the journey as he had before, but Clara felt his guidance in everything he did. He taught her how to observe animal tracks to find water, how to move quietly through tall grass, and how to rest in ways that would preserve energy and strength. He also shared stories of his own travels, carefully chosen to teach lessons without revealing too much of his past. Clara listened intently, finding comfort in the wisdom he offered. Each lesson, each shared story, felt like a step toward a life she could build for herself, free from fear and full of possibility. By the fourth day of travel, they reached a canyon that seemed to offer safety and privacy. The canyon walls rose high on either side, sheltering them from the wind and providing shade from the sun. A small stream ran through the center, and the area was rich with wild plants and grasses. Elijah stopped, studying the land carefully before turning to Clara. "This'll be a good place to rest for a while," he said. "We can set up camp and gather supplies. You'll be able to recover fully here, and we can plan the next steps." Clara nodded, grateful for the security and for the chance to pause after days of constant travel. They set up a small camp near the stream. Elijah arranged the supplies, while Clara helped prepare a place to sleep and a small area to tend their food and water. The canyon felt safe, almost like a hidden world removed from the harshness of the prairie. Birds sang in the trees, and the air smelled fresh and clean. Clara marveled at the beauty of the place. feeling a sense of peace she had not experienced in months. She realized that safety and comfort could exist even in the wild, and that the world had more kindness to offer than she had imagined. During the following days, Clara and Elijah worked together to make the canyon livable. Clara planted a small herb garden near the stream, using the knowledge she had gained from Mrs. Tully and her own experience. She collected wild berries and edible plants, learning which were safe and which were not. Elijah showed her how to build small, simple structures to protect them from the weather and how to store food so it would last. Together, they created a routine, a small rhythm that brought both productivity and a sense of normalcy. As time passed, Clara's confidence and independence grew. She could move through the canyon and surrounding areas with ease, gathering food, checking on the horse, and preparing meals without fear. She no longer relied solely on Elijah's guidance, though his presence remained a comfort and a source of wisdom. The partnership they had formed during their flight from Sundown Creek had deepened, built not only on trust but also on mutual respect and shared experience. Clara began to understand that her strength was not just in survival but in her ability to adapt, learn, and persevere. One afternoon, while resting near the stream, Clara and Elijah spoke openly about the events that had brought them together. Clara shared her reflections on Sundown Creek, the fear and suspicion she had faced, and the moments that had tested her courage. Elijah listened quietly, offering reassurance and perspective. "You survived because you never gave up," he said. "You faced fear, uncertainty, and danger, and you did not let it break you. That is strength, Clara." His words touched her deeply, reminding her that courage was not measured by the absence of fear, but by the determination to continue despite it. As weeks passed, Clara and Elijah's life in the canyon became more settled. They established routines for gathering food, tending the garden, caring for the horse, and maintaining their camp. Clara found joy in small accomplishments, whether it was harvesting fresh herbs, preparing a meal, or learning a new skill from Elijah. Each day brought new lessons and small victories, reinforcing the sense of freedom and control she had longed for. The shadow of Sundown Creek faded with distance, replaced by the possibility of a life built on resilience, kindness, and thoughtful action. One morning, Clara awoke to a sky filled with soft golden light. She stepped outside their shelter and took a deep breath, feeling the warmth of the sun on her face. The canyon seemed alive with movement, birds chirping, leaves rustling, and the water flowing gently over smooth stones. She realized that in this place she had found a home of sorts, not one of permanence alone, but of safety, peace, and opportunity. She could build a life here, free from fear, and carry the lessons she had learned into each new day. Elijah joined her, carrying water and a small basket of food. They shared a quiet meal, speaking little but communicating much through gestures and shared glances. Clara felt a deep sense of gratitude for his guidance and protection and a quiet pride in her own growth. She had survived Sundown Creek, endured fear and uncertainty, and discovered strengths she had not known she possessed. Now she could imagine a future full of possibility, built on courage, kindness, and trust. As days turned into weeks, Clara and Elijah explored the surrounding area, finding hidden groves, wildflowers, and streams teeming with small fish. Clara learned to track animals, identify edible plants, and navigate the terrain with skill. Elijah taught her how to care for the horse during long journeys and how to anticipate weather changes. The lessons were practical, but they also carried a deeper meaning: how to live with awareness, patience, and respect for the land and its challenges. Clara felt herself growing stronger, more confident, and more capable with each passing day. One evening, as the sun set in shades of pink and orange, they sat together near the stream, reflecting on everything that had brought them here. Clara thought of Sundown Creek, of the fear and cruelty she had faced, and of the mercy Elijah had shown. She realized that the journey had been more than an escape. It had been a lesson in resilience, trust, and the quiet power of kindness. Elijah had not only saved her from immediate danger, but he had also shown her how to navigate the world with courage and wisdom. In the following days, Clara began to envision a life beyond mere survival. She imagined planting a larger garden, learning new skills, and perhaps helping others who might find themselves in difficult situations. She realized that the strength she had discovered was not limited to herself. It could extend to others, offering hope and assistance where it was needed most. The experience of being abandoned, rescued, and guided had taught her that life's hardships could be transformed into lessons, and that acts of mercy and kindness could ripple far beyond their initial impact. The prairie around the canyon stretched endlessly, a reminder of freedom and possibility. Clara felt a deep connection to the land, to the lessons it had taught her, and to the quiet strength that had carried her through fear and uncertainty. She looked at Elijah, recognizing in him not only a protector but also a partner in this new life. Together, they had navigated challenges, weathered storms, and discovered the power of resilience and compassion. The journey had tested them, but it had also revealed their strength and humanity. As the sun rose each morning, Clara felt a renewed sense of hope. She had survived the cruelty of Sundown Creek, learned to trust herself and others, and built a foundation for a life full of possibility. The canyon had become a sanctuary, a place where fear no longer ruled, and where courage, patience, and kindness guided each decision. She knew that the journey would continue, but she faced it with confidence, knowing that she had the strength, skill, and support to meet whatever lay ahead. In the months that followed, Clara and Elijah's life in the canyon became a quiet legend among travelers. Stories spread of the woman who had survived the cruelty of a harsh town, guided by the quiet mercy of a cowboy. People spoke of her resilience, her courage, and the wisdom she had gained on her journey. Yet Clara did not seek recognition. Her satisfaction came from the knowledge that she had endured, grown, and built a life based on strength, kindness, and careful thought. By the end of the first year, the canyon had transformed from a temporary refuge into a true home. Clara's garden flourished, the horse thrived, and their small routines created a life of stability and purpose. She reflected often on her journey, understanding that the hardships she had faced had shaped her into a stronger, wiser, and more compassionate person. Elijah remained by her side, a constant source of guidance, support, and friendship. Together, they had created a life of freedom, resilience, and quiet fulfillment, a life that had been forged in courage and mercy. Clara often thought of Sundown Creek, the town that had abandoned her in fear and suspicion. She realized that the world would always hold challenges, but she no longer felt powerless. The breaking point she had endured had revealed her strength, and Elijah's quiet mercy had shown her the power of kindness. The canyon, the prairie, and the life they had built together stood as a testament to survival, courage, and hope. Clara had not only escaped danger, she had discovered herself.